So for the part of the evening that we've all been waiting for and why we're here, well, one of the big reasons why we're here, I've just gotten to know Dr. Andrews via email, and I thought she was a pretty serious person, and I'm not. And I thought, oh, well, okay, well, let's see how I do this. I don't want to screw it up and not make her like San Diego after she loves Orange County. So when I got here tonight, well, I'm sure she's a very serious person, but she's delightful. She's absolutely delightful. So anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Andrews. She has 22 years of corporate experience. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay. In the pharmaceutical biotech industry, and has a strong history of leading, educating, and inspiring others, which we all would love to do. She has helped thousands of leaders improve and develop through the use of presentations, workshops, coaching, and psychological instruments. Extensive work experience coupled with her dissertation research has given her a research-based expert level of knowledge on leadership, emotional intelligence, and gender in the workplace. She frequently publishes and presents on these topics and is also a certified instructor for Insight's Discovery Colors and Blanchard's Situational Leadership. Most of us are certainly familiar with Dr. Blanchard here in Escondido. Dr. Andrews holds a Doctor of Education degree in Organizational Leadership from Pepperdine University, an MBA from Pepperdine, and a BA in Psychology from the University of California, Irvine. She has authored multiple published articles and blogs, leads webinars and workshops at a variety of conferences, and serves on advisory and editorial boards of directors. We are honored to have you here this evening. Dr. Andrews, welcome.
Thank you for the very nice introduction. I always like to say I like to have a broad diversity, not only in my experience, but my education. So with my degrees, my psych degree, I'll analyze you. With my MBA degree, I'll put it in a spreadsheet. And with my doctorate in education, I'll teach it back to you. So I like to be well-rounded. So welcome. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here tonight. As was mentioned earlier, I did this talk almost exactly a year ago at Allergan in Orange County. And we had, I think, record attendance for that talk, and I'm very happy to be invited back, so thank both Hologic and the HBA for having me back. So the subtitle of this talk is this: Perception Impacts Promotion. So I'm going to talk about how emotional intelligence, leadership, and gender, they all overlap. So there's a lot that's been studied on leadership, tons of books on leadership, right, for decades. There's a lot out there on emotional intelligence, and there's a fair amount on gender differences. But no one has really pulled it all together and looked at it from a gendered perspective and how it affects career advancement. And perception plays a very large part in all three of those. So this is the agenda. So I planned on covering, and I'm just going to walk around a little bit because I don't like to be buried behind a podium. So I'll talk about EQ and leadership, the gap. My research, we'll talk about barriers, gender differences in the workplace, which I find most people are not aware of. They're subtle differences. Recommendations for organizations, and then lastly, I will leave you with some practical EQ strategies that you can apply in your work lives to help improve your leadership and your career advancement. So we have a lot to cover tonight. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand during. Certainly, it's informal. Okay, so what is EQ? What I find, everyone's heard of it. It's been around for about 3 decades now. It's a buzz term, but when I ask people, well, what is it exactly? People have a hard time pinpointing it. So here's the formal definition. It's a form of social intelligence. It involves our ability to monitor our own and others' feelings and emotions, discriminate among them, and use them to guide our thinking and action. So I like to call it the other kind of smart. Okay, so we all know IQ. IQ is your intellectual intelligence. It can be measured, right? Your EQ is your people skills. And I've always been fascinated with EQ because it's the differentiator between good and great in life. And life success and work success and leadership success, everything comes back to how well you get along in the sandbox and play with others. That is your emotional intelligence. And when it comes to IQ, we are all smart enough. So most people haven't had an IQ assessment. I've never had an IQ assessment. But IQ is not the issue for most of us. You're all smart enough to get your job. You're smart enough to keep your job in most cases. And you're smart enough to get through life relatively successfully. But that differentiator is emotional intelligence. Okay, so EQ assessments. I want to talk just a little bit about this because I do get a lot of questions. There are there's less than a dozen companies out there that do EQ. There are 3 major emotional intelligence companies. However, there are different models. Each of these models are slightly different, but they measure specific competencies, they give you a score, and they benchmark you against the general population. How many of you have had an EQ assessment in here? Okay, just a handful of you. Okay, that's about what we see in the general population. Only a handful of people have ever had their emotional intelligence measured. The good news, it's easy to do. Multi-health systems, Hay Group, and Talent Smart are the 3 major available on the market EQ assessments. Multi-health systems, and I did a little research for you, included the website. Someone asked me earlier during the networking, where did EQ start? It actually started with Ravun Baran, who was a PhD student in South Africa. And I'm going off course a little bit, but here's a little bit of history for you. In 1985, he was the first one to coin the term emotional quotient and look at competencies. Then 5 years later, in 1990, Solovey and Meyer, or researchers, expanded upon that, and they're the ones that came up with the term emotional intelligence. 5 years later, in 1995, Daniel Goleman, researcher at Harvard, started writing books and publishing, and he's really considered the modern father of emotional intelligence today. So, but that's only been since 1995. But he didn't start the concept. So multi-health systems, Baran's original assessment, their EQ assessment is based on Baran's model. And it's the EQI 2.0. It's the most robust of the 3. It's the one that I used in my dissertation research. And there's a 360 feedback option and leadership options as well. And the reports are very robust with strategies included. So, and the starting price is $55. So these are all relatively inexpensive. The Hay Group is the one based on Daniel Goleman's model. And that's the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, or the ESCI, as it's often called. That one is half the length of the multi-health systems one. You do have a 360 option based on 4 composites and 12 competencies. And then I could not find prices on that one. You have to call them to get a price. So. And then lastly, Talent Smart. It's here in your backyard in San Diego, right? Started by Gene Greaves and Travis Bradbury. EQ Appraisal is the name of their EQ instrument. Now this one is the shortest of the 3. It's only 30 questions. You also have 360 and leadership reports, and based on 4 competencies, and it's $40 starting price. So that gives you just a little bit of background, because only a few of you raised your hands, but for those who are interested in getting an EQ assessment for yourself, I'd highly recommend it. Because how do you know what your emotional intelligence level is unless you assess it? So I'll leave it at that. Okay, let me go to a question here. Let's see a show of hands. How many of you think men are more emotionally intelligent than women? No hands have gone up, not one. Well, we have one male in the room, maybe Colin, you think, okay. Usually I get a few hands, and they're usually the men in the room who raise their hands for that. Okay, so I clearly see where you stand. How many of you think women are more emotionally intelligent than men? Take it, all of you, okay. That is a trick question, and I get people every time on that. Men and women are actually equally emotionally intelligent, but what differs is the competencies. We differ in the specific, what's called gender-specific competencies. So let me get into these. This is how the data shakes out over millions of people worldwide. So it's not regionally specific, worldwide numbers. In general, women score higher than men in empathy, social responsibility, and interpersonal relationships. Empathy, markedly higher than men. This is in general, again, in millions of assessments that's been done worldwide. Men generally score higher than women in areas of assertiveness, independence, and what's another word for self-regard?
Ego.
No? Something else I'm looking for. Confidence. Confidence. Self-regard is your confidence. So in general, men score higher in assertiveness, independence, and confidence than women. And women outshine men in these areas. So I was fascinated with this, and what I really wanted to research is how does this play into career advancement and leadership effectiveness? Okay, so these attributes play, what I found is they play a significant role in how we perceive men and women in the workplace. So keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to that. Okay, so why should you care about emotional intelligence? Well, first of all, you make more money. Studies show that those with higher emotional intelligence make $29,000 more than their lower EQ counterparts. 58% of your job performance is attributed to emotional intelligence. So you'll be more successful. Deeper relationships. In this new economy that we live in, this new world economy, so it's fast-paced, it's competitive, it's overstimulated economy. How many of you have heard the book, The World is Flat by Thomas Friedman? Mm-hmm. Have you guys? Okay. I've read that in my doctoral program and was just blown away by that book. Basically, with this book, what Thomas says is that your skills that you currently have can be outsourced right now. Most of your skills. So somewhere else, someone in another country can do it faster, better, and cheaper than you are currently performing. Faster, better, and cheaper. So you can be outsourced. The only differentiator is your relationship. So in the new world economy, it's about the depth of relationships, and that's where emotional intelligence comes in, is helping you build those relationships. And lastly, it'll help you keep your job. There's a saying, hired on IQ, fired on EQ. Now, if you think about that, what that means is that when you're a hiring man, when you're hired, what are people looking at?
Your resume.
Your resume, exactly. What's on your resume? Work experience,
Work experience.
your education, degrees, right. That's all based on your IQ, really. That's quantitative data. But once you get the job, how well you adapt and connect and get along with others in the workplace is your emotional intelligence. So you're hired based on your IQ, but you're fired based on your EQ, or lack of EQ. Sobering thought, isn't it? Okay, so let's talk about this chasm we have that we call the leadership gap. When I first heard about the gap several years ago, when studies really started being published, I was both appalled and intrigued about what is going on here. Women, and now I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, but women bring a tremendous amount to the table, to relationships, to the business, to the workplace. And for 40 years now, we've been in the workplace that has not been tapped into. So that intrigued me, but what's going on? So here's the current numbers. Women make up 57% of the U.S. workforce today, over half. They also make up over half of all management and professional occupations are now women. This one really strikes me. 60% of bachelor's degrees in the U.S. are now by women. 60%. Around 15% of executive officer positions are held by women in Fortune 500 companies. And the number that just doesn't seem to budge much, 4.6. That is still the current number of women who lead Fortune 500 companies. So, yes, Rose.
What's your data source for this, or like even what year?
Catalyst and McKinsey. I think Catalyst is the main one, and this year. Okay. That's as of February. Okay. That's this month. Yeah, I just looked it up to make sure my numbers were up to date, because my dissertation research was in 2013, and I checked, and the numbers have not changed, unfortunately. So now for all of you math majors in the room, Fortune 500 companies, 4.6%. That equals 23 females who are leading Fortune 500 companies. But if you do the math, that leaves 477 men leading Fortune 500 companies. So when you think of it in those terms, we're not doing so well. 23 to 477. So I don't want to discourage you, but we have a long ways to go. From over 50% getting experience, getting degrees, and less than 5% leading. So we can no longer say it's historic. We can no longer say, well, women just haven't been in the workplace as long. We can no longer say women are not as educated. We're there. We're there. We should be seeing markedly higher numbers in leadership than we are. Now, what's behind this? Well, there's a lot behind it. So let's talk about that. So what's the problem? The problem is that we now enter ranks at equal or greater numbers than men, education equal or greater numbers than men, and very few women hold senior leadership positions. So in my dissertation, what I did is I studied women at various levels in a pharmaceutical company. So I looked at women at the administrative assistant level, manager level, director level, and vice president level. I gave them all an EQ assessment, and I followed up with in-depth interviews, so it was both quantitative and qualitative. I also looked at all generations, veterans, baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials. So the instrument I use, as I mentioned, is the multi-health system. It's based on 5 composites and 15 different EQ competencies. Here it's laid out for you. Self-perception composite is made up of 3 EQ competencies: self-regard, self-actualization, emotional self-awareness. You have a self-expression composite, you have interpersonal composite, a decision-making, and a stress management. Each have 3 EQ competencies. I've color-coded for you in pink and blue, sorry for the fun, but the gender-specific EQ attributes. So as you can see, the interpersonal composite, that's where women shine. All 3 of those, women score higher than men worldwide. Men are higher in self-expression composite and the self-perception composite as far as confidence and self-regard. And there are many other EQ competencies that are gender neutral. Flexibility, problem solving, optimism, emotional expression. There's no significant difference between men and women in those areas. So what did I find in my research? I surprisingly found that women at the higher levels of leadership were stronger in the male-specific attributes, which is the decision-making and self-expression composites. I have found that women in the middle manager group were higher in the female-specific attributes. So I thought, okay, what's going on here? Well, what that told me, and I asked women this in my interviews as well, what it told me is that as women climb the rank, the leadership ladder, they are adapting their EQ attributes because that is what's expected of them to be perceived as a leader by both their bosses and their direct reports. So women, and I saw this across the board, women are adapting their behavior when they get to those leadership roles to be perceived as leaders. And women have to do this, frankly, for a number of reasons, which we'll talk about. The middle manager group were markedly higher in the female-specific attributes. So what might you think is going on here? That's exactly right. To be a middle manager, you have to get work done through others. That's exactly right. And to do that, you have to leverage those female-specific attributes, which is your empathy, your interpersonal relationships, your listening skills, your collaboration skills. So I found that very interesting how that fell out. I also found that the 2 oldest participants, now this is good news for all of us, the 2 oldest participants had the highest overall EQ scores. That's consistent with the literature. So good news for all of you, as we age, your EQ will increase. Unlike IQ, which remains relatively stable our whole lives. Emotional intelligence increases as we get older. And that's because we gain life experiences as we get older. And we get better at stress tolerance, we get better at decision making, we get better at empathy and social responsibility, we get better at decision making. All of that comes with our life experiences. I also asked all my participants, which EQ attribute had the most impact on your career advancement? These are the 5 that they identified as having the most impact. Assertive self-regard, interpersonal relationships, problem solving, and stress tolerance. I'm going to come back to these. Okay, I'd like to share a few stories with you now. During my interviews, I asked women about their challenges they've had on their journeys. The women who were naturally higher in the male-specific EQ attributes shared with me that one woman shared that people had a hard time accepting her as a leader because they expected an empathetic woman. Another woman shared that she was told to tone down her assertiveness, be a team player, and be more social. And these are women in vice president level positions and director level positions. Women that were naturally higher in female specific attributes. One shared that she is a naturally empathetic woman. However, she's perceived as lacking substance and intelligence, and that being analytical and empathetic are mutually exclusive. And that got echoed again and again. But where does that come from? Who says that you can't be empathetic and analytical at the same time? You absolutely can. But our perception of what a leader is not that. And finally, another woman shared that when she did express emotions at work, her boss viewed her as unstable and unable to handle stress. So the example here was that she, and this was a vice president, she was in an annual performance review discussion with her boss. And she started crying. You know, I don't know what it was about, but she started crying, got upset. And after that, she did not get the special assignment. She did not get the big projects. And he viewed her as unable to handle stress because she cried during a performance interview. Now, that's a shame. That shouldn't happen to anybody. But what it does tell us is that, unfortunately, the workplace is not a completely friendly environment to express emotions. And it's something to be aware of. And it's something, as women, to keep in check as well. And that experience, unfortunately, was echoed by many other women as well at all different levels. Yes?
I'm struck by that comment though, because to me, there's plenty of emotion expressed in the workforce. It's the way it's expressed. So the male expression of emotion is often pound your fist, there's a lot of emotion being expressed.
Right.
That's just the acceptable way of expressing it.
Yes.
It's the wet expression of motion that is not.
Yes. Well, and that's an excellent point, because we're talking about double standards now. Right. So, excellent point. And you're absolutely right. We're emotional creatures. We're not robots in the workplace, and we shouldn't be robots. None of us want to work in environments like that. We want emotions. I mean, it's who we are. But we have too many leaders who do view that as unstable and not able to handle stress, and that has to change. But you're right. It's selective emotions. Okay, so what's the significance of the study? Well, the whole point of this is that corporations are not leveraging their enormous pool of talent, which is now over 50% in the workforce. A natural shift to a more gender-balanced senior leadership should be a reasonable expected outcome. It really should be. When corporations develop new leaders, the female population is still underrepresented. If companies tap those, it would have a positive impact on diversity, not only in the workforce, but also on the board. And finally, stakeholders expect of companies to appropriately manage and maximize their resources, including their human capital resources. Most companies aren't doing that today. So here we are, 2015. We have companies that aren't even close to tapping into the resources that are inherent in their employees. Okay. So let's talk about the barriers. So what's causing all this? What is behind all this? Okay, there are 4 primary barriers, 4 major barriers anyways. And when I did my research, it fell into these buckets. So first you have structural barriers. So all of you are aware of these. These are your lack of access to your informal networks, such as the Old Boys Network, still alive and well, going out to drinks after work, playing golf, whatever it may be. Those informal networks is where critical business and relationship building occurs. And women often aren't part of that. And sometimes we don't want to be part of this sometimes, right? We want to go home to the kids, go home to the family. So we value different things. But for women who do want access, that's still a challenge. We also still need more female role models and still need more female mentors. And we need more male sponsors. So that's not news. And this has been out now for a few years. But there's still structural obstacles that exist. Institutional mindsets. This includes role congruity theory. I'll talk about that. Gender bias, gender stereotyping is alive and well, and agentic leader behaviors. And I'll talk about that next. The institutional mindsets, by the way, that is the category. These are deep-rooted, largely generational based, but they're deeply held beliefs by both men and women. And it's a type of bias. So those mindsets is going to take years to change. But I think we can change them. Individual mindsets. There's a large percent of women who hold themselves back or select out of the workforce. So the data shows that women tend to get to the director level and then fall off for a variety of reasons. They value work-life balance more, want to have kids, want to start another career, want to start their own business, or they just don't like the politics at the top that they see. So they self-select out. So there's also individual mindsets. I added one. I want to thank Rose, actually. Rose, you sent in, we must be part of a LinkedIn group or something, but you brought to my attention an article. So Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant are doing a series of articles in the New York Times right now, and it just came out last week.
It was in our chapter's LinkedIn site, which you were all welcome to.
So I must be part of that because I got your email. But I looked at it and I love the term office housework. Now, I would put this under the individual mindset category, although it is linked to the institutional mindset. It's a part of gender stereotyping, but women hold themselves back. So what do you think that means, office housework? Getting the coffee. What else? Meeting notes. Maybe picking up the sprinkles cupcakes. Picking up the drinks. Maybe taking the time behind the scenes to mentor younger employees. Maybe behind the scenes planning a meeting. Women often do the behind the scenes things. Men do the things that are noticeable, that get recognized, but women often do the behind the scenes. That's what's referred to as the office housework. So it's part of gender stereotyping because it's an expectation, because it's perceived that women are more communal, and so they should be doing those types of things. But as women, you have to put a conscious effort into not always being the one to do that as well. We need to share the workload, and more men also need to have those same behaviors. So something to be aware of. Lastly, we have lifestyle choices as another barrier. This includes work-life balance issues, family choices, and breadwinner caregiver issues. So breadwinner caregiver. If a woman is the primary breadwinner of the household, she's usually the primary caregiver also. If a man is the primary breadwinner, he's rarely the primary caregiver. Big distinction. So that is a decision that couples have to work out and families need to work out, but the burden of both of those often falls on a woman. So that, and as long as women are having children, and I don't think that's changing anytime soon, this is going to be an issue. So the barriers, they're multifactorial. They're deep-rooted. Some we have control over. Some we need to be aware of. We need men and women to be part of the discussion and part of the solution as well. And it's not just about awareness. It needs to be taken a step further. It's about examining why we have these biases and what can be done about them. Okay, leadership. So, actually, did I take out the agentic slide? I think I did. Let me go back and explain. Role congruity theory, I think, underlies a lot of this. What this is, you know what, I'm sorry, I think I do have it. Let me ask the question, then I'll bring it up. Okay, when you think of a leader, what qualities do you think of? Just shout them out.
Visionary.
Strategic, visionary, confident. Anything else? Trustworthy. I like that. Intelligent. Good. Okay. So the first three I heard were generally associated with males. Now, this is a stereotypically masculine trait, so it's called agenic leader behavior. So when most people, you guys have some good ones, but when most people think of leaders, they think assertive, aggressive, competitive. Those are mostly male traits. So what happens, actually, I'll come at that in a minute. That's agenic. Role congruity theory. This is a prejudice that exists when one person holds beliefs or stereotypes about a group that are inconsistent with the behavior thought to be necessary to succeed in that role. Let me give an example. Male nurses. Not a typical male role. Now, does that mean men can't be effective nurses? Absolutely not. But generally, female nurses are more positively received by their peers than male nurses are because they're in a role congruent with their gender. I'll give you another example. Female military leaders. Now, they have a lot of pushback. They're not always well received by their units. Does it mean they can't be effective leaders? Doesn't mean that at all. But they're in a role that's not perceived to be congruent with their gender. So this underlies a lot of our bias and our stereotyping that exists in the workplace. Okay. So women often want different things. So this is a good thing. We're different. We're wired differently. And women are often confronted by barriers that men don't have to face. So as a result of that, many women have opted for the private sector, nonprofit companies, or startup companies. Most startups are women-owned businesses. Those barriers I just talked about are minimized in these companies. So for example, there'd be less gender-biased stereotyping, you'd have more female mentors, you'd have more female role models, and you'd have more support, leadership support. So it's no surprise, actually, that more women have opted for different non-traditional corporations and companies because they don't have the barriers that are in large public companies as much. Okay. One final comment about barriers. It's a global phenomenon. This is not US-centric. It's global, where women are disproportionately concentrated in lower level and lower authority positions. And the barriers have been around for decades, and they're held by men and women, both. Any comments, questions, surprises? Centuries. Well, centuries, true. We weren't measuring it centuries ago, but you're right. It's absolutely. It's been around for centuries. Absolutely. Okay. Let's talk about some gender differences in the workplace. Okay. I love this cartoon because I think it really sums it all up. You have a blue line and a red line. The mission, go to Gap, buy a pair of pants, right? The man is out of there in 6 minutes with $33, he has his pants. The woman meanders, takes a nice little journey. 3 hours later, over $800, she's got those same pants. So this is a whimsical look at the differences. It's no surprise we're hardwired, but it carries into the workplace. So let's talk about that. Okay, men and women live in different cultures. This starts at birth and carries into that workplace. It's not about rights and wrongs, it's about difference. We are just different. This difference shows up in virtually every aspect of business. How we work within an organizational structure, how we conduct meetings, how we network, interpret information, work in teams, communicate, lead, take risks. Virtually every aspect, we're different. These differences are subtle, and what I find is most people are not aware of these. So I'll give you some examples here. Boys play games centered around conflict, win and lose scenarios. So G.I. Joe was one. What are some other games that boys play? Pardon? Okay, like sports, football, soccer, competitive, okay. What other games do boys play? Video games, okay. Video games are competitive. It's about winning and losing, scoring points. So sports, video games, cowboys and Indians, if they still do that, cops and robbers, G.I. Joe. What boys are taught, the lessons they're taught very early on is win and lose, and when the game's over, you're friends again. Girls are taught different lessons. What are some of the games girls play? Dolls. House. School. Okay. Dress up. Tea parties. The games that girls play, not all girls and not all boys, but in general, are centered around relationships. So what girls are taught very early is to avoid conflict, to negotiate, to collaborate, and to get along with an even distribution of power. In contrast, boys are taught power hierarchy. You win, you lose. I'm the winner, you're the loser. Not an even distribution of power. Girls, very different. Girls want that even distribution of power. You cannot lose at Barbies. Right? It's not possible. You can't lose at Barbies. So,
You can if you have to beat Ken every time.
you can if you have to beat Ken, right? Okay, so how does this show up in the workplace? Well, believe it or not, as much as we try against it, it shows up every day in the workplace. How we conduct meetings. Men generally get their ducks in a row before the meeting, to go around and talk to all the key players, so when the meeting actually happens, it's already occurred, in essence, because they've lined their ducks up. Well, the woman doesn't know this. The woman shows up to the meeting with all her great ideas, ready to dialogue with everyone in the meeting. Unbeknownst to her, the meeting's already happened. Yes?
Do you think that's a little limiting, though? I think, because just that example alone, like, like you're trying to sell in an idea, in my opinion, you know who the, non-decision maker, the influencers are,
Mhm.
that's, you kind of do all your homework, know your audience, so that's done before. I guess I'm not seeing it as black and white.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree that there is
Mhm.
some tenets there that you are speaking to, but I don't think it's as black and white maybe as I'm hearing it.
Well, and it's not, because we vary. So not all men and women fall into all these patterns I'm talking about. I'm talking in generalities. But it's something to be aware of, because not all women go around and line up their ducks in a row first. A lot of women don't, because, again, going back to the lessons we're taught, we're going to show up to okay, there's a meeting on my calendar. I'm going to show up and talk to everyone at that meeting about my ideas. Well, in a female gender culture, that makes sense. But in a male culture, he has learned that I got to line up all my teammates first before the game starts. And so it's just a difference to be aware of. Again, it's not about rights and wrongs either. I'm not saying lining up your ducks first is better than the other. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's a difference to be aware of. Here's another difference. In meetings, men generally dominate the conversation, talk in a declamatory voice like they're authority, and they tend to interrupt more. Women tend to raise their hand, wait their turn, and smile more in meetings. Even today, it still happens. Again, not right and wrong, it's about just difference. Let's talk about communication. We have differences in all of these. So the way we talk. So men, generally, when they talk about credit and blame, they generally point the finger. When it comes to taking the blame, they generally point to external factors. When it comes to taking the credit, they point inward. Women are just the opposite. When it comes to taking credit, women point outward and credit people they're working with or their team. When it comes to blame, where do women go? In. Just the opposite. So the way we talk and express ourselves are different. Verbals, nonverbals. Women are generally better than men at picking up nonverbals. Men are generally better at picking up verbals. Networking. Again, this is all studies, that's research, based on research that's been done. When it comes to networking, men go around and message what they're doing constantly to their bosses. Women, in contrast, are in their offices, working away on their computers, and they hope to be noticed. They hope the bosses are going to take notice. Well, if you're the hiring manager 3 months down the line and you have a position open, who are you going to think of? You're going to think of the person who's been in your head for the 6 times in the last 3 months, and that's the guy, because he's been messaging what he's doing. Now, women often see this as self-promotional and we're not as comfortable with it. But again, it's a difference. It's a difference to keep in mind. You have to go out and message what you're doing proactively and network it. And HBA is great for this because this is a networking group. So this is something that women definitely need to get better on because it's the reality of the workplace we work in. Yes?
One thing I've noticed is men are very direct in their communication. If they
Yeah.
don't like something, they don't like it. But if a woman shares that they don't like it, there's always a baby road getting to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I see this in my meetings every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, how would we be perceived if we articulated that we didn't like it the same way they did?
That's a fair point. It is being seen as aggressive and direct, and I experience that all the time. Having obtained some of those skill sets, I think I've increased them.
Yeah, yeah. But there are differences to be aware of. I mean, that's the whole point of sharing this with you tonight. I want you to be aware of these. These are subtle. Most people aren't aware of these, but it happens every day. Listening. We have differences in how we listen. Men, no, I'll start with women. When women listen, women nod, I hear you, keep going, to the speaker. And I know I'm a nodder, so when I'm talking to someone or when I'm listening to someone, I nod. And what I'm trying to say to them is, okay, I'm with you, keep going. Now, I may not agree with what you're saying, but by nodding, I'm telling you, I hear you, keep going. Men do not nod. Men only nod in agreement. So watch this next time you're in a conversation. Watch men and women. You'll see women nodding. Okay, I get it. Yeah, okay. But women may not agree. Men will usually only nod in agreement. So why am I bringing this up? Again, it's about perception. The perception may be that the woman is just agreeable to everything and maybe not decisive. She just smiles and nods. Well, that's not the case at all, but that's the perception. So that's what I want you to be aware of. So what's actually one point about leadership. We have differences in how we lead. So a lot of studies have showed men and women are equally effective leaders. Lots of data out there on that. Equally effective leaders. But we vary in our styles. Transactional and transformational, you may have heard of these terms. Transactional leadership is based on an even exchange of transactions. It's a relationship between the leader and the follower that says, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. An even exchange. Men, that's more associated with male type of leadership. Women are more associated with transformational leadership. Transformational is a relationship between a leader and a follower based around collective problem solving, collective decision making, collaboration, and cooperation. Women are much better at that than men. Here's the good news. In today's highly matrixed environments, there's a lot of data that shows we need transformational leadership. Not the transactional type. We need the transformational. And women, you are better at that. Okay, so what's the take home of all this? The take home is very different perceptions by coworkers and your leaders, but the result is a very real impact on promotion. So I want you to be aware of this. Okay, recommendations for organizations. So if you happen to be in a HR role, for example, or you work with HR, or you have an influence in your corporations, here's some recommendations to help improve diversity. So these 5 practices were consistently tied to hiring, retaining, and promoting women. First of all, hands-on leadership starting at the top. The CEO and your senior leaders, but your CEO needs to be personally involved and invested and actively role model the desired behaviors and mindsets to build that open and accepting culture. So you need hands-on leadership from the top. Diversity leadership with clout, and the reason it says clout is because it has to have teeth. So how many times have you seen an organization where they put together a task force on diversity to improve the workforce? To check a box, exactly, to check a box. So and people know this, employees know it, whether it's a true effort or if it's just a check the box exercise. So have diversity leadership with clout. Appoint a well-respected leader to shine the spotlight on diversity issues and drive continual vigilance. Pervasive mentoring programs. Mentoring, as you mentioned earlier, mentoring programs are highly successful for both men and women. A CEO or the diversity leader should be personally involved and accountable. These mentors create opportunities, offer support and advocacy. Robust talent management program. So HR should have a program in place that is seriously looking at how they develop the talent in their organizations. Recruiting, promoting, and succession planning practices should call out performance with regard to gender. Leaders become sponsors, strategize with women about potential career moves, and responsible for the development. So behind closed doors, your HR department should be having serious conversations. They should be looking at their numbers and saying, why do we have no females on our board? Why do we have no females in succession planning for our VP positions? And have serious conversations about why that is and what they can do about it. So that needs to happen. And then finally, I'd recommend emotional intelligence education. We've already talked about the importance of it in the workplace and the impact it has on job performance and leadership effectiveness. So EQ assessments, like I talked about earlier, you could provide those. Training, coaching, development programs based on EQ across all employees, including men and women of different generations. So those are recommendations. So finally, and I mentioned I wanted to leave you with some practical strategies for EQ. Okay, so this is the model of the 2.0 model. And I mentioned, oh, actually, before I get to that, does anyone know who this woman is other than me? Who watches TED? Does anyone watch TED Talks? Okay, I'll give you a hint. She's one of the most popular TED Talks, the most highly viewed, like 45 million people. That's right. Excellent. Excellent. Dr. Amy Cuddy from Harvard. So I had the opportunity to meet her at a training conference last year. She was one of the keynote speakers. Her research is on power posing. Has anyone heard about power posing? Okay. So I'd recommend, first of all, to go onto TED.com, and she comes up as one of the #1. But just type in, just go to most popular, and she'll come up. But her research out of Harvard is fascinating. What she found, power posing, okay, there's the Wonder Woman pose. There's the starfish, which we're doing in this picture here. So the starfish is expansive, space occupying, toes and hands pointed out, and legs spread equal shoulder width apart. What she has found in her research, if you power pose for 2 minutes, it increases testosterone levels and lowers cortisol levels. 2 minutes. Let's do it. That's right. So, and she talks about this in her TED Talk. So, it's fascinating. And so she has all these studies so that shows that, so basically, higher testosterone, low cortisol. Cortisol is your, does anyone know what cortisol does? It's your stress hormone, exactly. So high testosterone, low cortisol equals power. This gives you a feeling of power, even if you're feeling powerless. This changes your physiology and actually raises your testosterone and lowers your cortisol level. So she recommends doing this in front, before a job interview or before speaking. It's something like this. Anything that you need power, and this has been studied, she's done in blind people who's never seen poses like this. It's universal. People, when they triumph and they want to show power, it's the same pose. It's the same in the animal kingdom as well. Okay, so I was fascinated with it because from an emotional intelligence standpoint, we know now that women are not as strong as men in confidence and assertiveness. Power posing can help that because it increases that testosterone. Another thing that I asked Amy was that, well, it increases testosterone. I said, well, are you saying then if high testosterone, low cortisol equals power and leadership, are you saying that men have more potential for leadership? She says, absolutely not. It's about the relative, it's about the amount of testosterone relative to the change in cortisol. So I was very relieved to hear this, because what the bottom line is, women have the capability to be just as effective leaders as men, and it's about that change relative to cortisol. It's not about the amount of circulating testosterone you have to start with. It's about the change. And power posing. So I would recommend power posing as a way, if you are a woman who want to increase your confidence or assertiveness, try it out. That's one strategy for you. Okay, assertiveness. So I mentioned earlier that my dissertation participants, I asked them what 5 EQ attributes had the most impact on their career advancement. Assertiveness was number 1. Here's an exercise you can do in the next 2 weeks. Write down situations where you behave assertively, passively, or aggressively. Do you see a pattern? And note the reasons that you were not assertive or unable to be assertive in that situation. And I like the little graphic there. Assertiveness is not aggressiveness. It's the Venn diagram between the two. It's asserting what you need, asserting your ideas. And for women, of all the EQ attributes, this is the one I would recommend that you improve. If you didn't work on only one, it would be to be more assertive. Because you have wonderful ideas and skills and knowledge to offer a corporation or a company or whatever line of business you're in. And you just need to assert yourself more. And again, why don't we? We're conditioned from birth not always to do that. Confidence. This is the other one I would highly recommend. If you're a woman who needs a boost in confidence, have conversations with people you respect and trust. What do they see as your strengths and weaknesses, and why? I've put here, let go of negative self-talk. This is something that women have much more than men, is that negative self-talk, so let go of that. And talk to people you trust and ask them, honestly, about your strengths and weaknesses. That will help you get a different perspective on your confidence. Interpersonal relationships. Identify someone whose relationship with you is ineffective. Meet and arrive at an action plan to support each other's mutual needs. So that's something you can do to help boost interpersonal relationships if that's not a strength of yours. Problem solving. Create more opportunities to solve problems with others. You can organize teams that deal with problems as they arise. What I really like about this is it changes your perspective from being a problem sufferer to a problem solver. When you step out of yourself and you start helping others work on their problems, it changes your perspective and makes you a better problem solver. And then the 5th EQ attribute that my research recommends stress tolerance. And that's do someone a favor. It allows you to, again, here's the problem solver and sufferer again, and helps put problems in perspective. So again, help each other out. That will help your stress tolerance level as well. Now stress, I just talked about it with Amy Cuddy. This is your cortisol. Again, so testosterone, down cortisol will help your stress tolerance with emotional intelligence as well. And finally, the final question that I asked all my participants is, what advice would you give other women who are coming up through the ranks in terms of leadership as far as their EQ competencies? And this is the answers. Improve your self-regard. Be confident and not so hard on yourself. Improve your assertiveness. Don't be afraid to ask for what you want. Improve your problem solving. Bring more value to your organization. Improve self-actualization. That's the realization of your dreams. Do what you really want to do and what you're passionate about. Improve your stress tolerance, as we just talked about. Talk to others and think things through. Control the emotional expression, going back to what we touched on earlier. Don't overly rely on emotions in the workplace, if you can help it. And lastly, and this is my favorite one, don't lose your empathy. As leaders, or even as managers, people appreciate it, and it's important to them. And that is a quality, that is the one EQ attribute women were markedly higher than men, like 3 times higher empathy scores. So keep that. That's a treasure. So finally, perception impacts promotion. I've given you a lot of stuff today about perception and how it shows up. Yes, there's a leadership gap. Yes, there are barriers. Yes, there are EQ differences. And yes, we have gender differences. But there's a global movement going on, and I credit Sheryl Sandberg for part of that. So for Lean In came out in 2013. And that was great because it helped bring the conversation to the mainstream again. There's also corporate pressure, more and more corporate pressure on companies to diversify their leadership and their boards. I just read an article a few weeks ago that Yahoo is putting something like $5 billion into diversity initiatives over the next 5 years to better their diversity initiatives. So there's definitely corporate pressure on companies to do this. Women are educated, experienced, and we're empowered. New generations bring new attitudes. This is good news. Data shows, the most recent data shows that as millennials come up and enter the workforces, they have different opinions on women on leadership in general and women in the workforce. And here's the really good news. Millennial men have the same attitudes towards work-life balance as women have had for decades. So it's changing, slowly changing as new generations are coming up. And then finally, having an awareness of all this is knowledge, and as we all know, knowledge is power. So I would like to leave you with this. Be encouraged. We are slowly making gains. Be persistent. Don't give up on your aspirations. And speak up for what you really care about. And I wish you every success in your career. So with that, thank you. So I have a website that I've set up around these topics. So what I would like, actually I'm looking to do, is to launch a speaking and consulting business based on this research. We all know we need it, right? Based on what we just talked about. There's my email if you want to reach out. Outside, there's a contact sheet. If you want to stay connected and stay up to date on my research, please fill out the contact, or you could drop your business card in that little yellow cup. And finally, I've had a number of articles published on this research, on this topic in magazines. The 2 articles that have been published in Training Industry Magazine both were distinguished as the top 10 most read articles of 2014 and 2013. So there's a lot of interest in these topics. So I'm happy to send you links to these articles. If you just write down your business card or your contact, I'd be happy to send you those links. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
Oh yeah, questions.
You mentioned turning this into a speaking engagement thing, and one of the things that I kept thinking while you were giving your talk is how many times have you had the opportunity to present this in front of like a room full of men? Because, you know, as much as we're all here and we want to make a change, it really, there's still some people around us that might be limiting that. So
Yes, and that's an excellent, so her question is, well, how many times have I spoken to?
you're making that sounds like that's where you'd like to go, but
Yeah.
realistically, like how have you had the opportunity to present this to like large audiences?
Yeah, so I've spoken at a couple major training conferences, ASTD for one, and there are like 13,000 people that attend that. But I had 200 people attend my workshop on this topic, this exact talk, at 8 in the morning on the last day of the conference. 200 people showed up. So again, that tells me there's a tremendous interest in this. And again, this is almost a perfect storm, because we got the experience, we have the education, we have empowered, we got a movement going on, there's interest in it's all coming together. Now, it's going to take time, but another point is this is fantastic because we all need awareness, but we also need men to be part of the conversation. So for my talks, I probably get 70 to 80% women and the rest men, but the men that have come up to me after the talks have echoed the same things the women have. Like, I had no idea about these issues, and we really need to do something and get serious about this. So there are men who care about these issues that we need to get mobilized.
Yeah, well, because I feel sometimes trapped as I move up, right, the ladder. It's like between just being myself and hoping that it just gets accepted and I don't get viewed as like, oh, she's a and or portraying the like adjusting my behavior to be more
Yeah.
male-like. right? So
Mhm.
it's hard as you move up the ladder to know which way to go, like to hope that people just
Yeah.
view your female attributes as positive,
Yeah.
or whether to adjust, make that adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thank you for bringing that up, because I've gotten asked before, well, do we have to adjust? I don't want to adjust. Well, you should be authentic to yourself. So one point I didn't make, that not all men and women fall into gender-specific patterns. There are women who are naturally high in male-specific EQ attributes, and there are men. I've had men come up to me and say, I'm higher on the women. I'm higher on the women attributes. And that's great, fantastic. But in general, I'm talking in general patterns that we see. So what should you do? I mean, only you can answer that. You know your situation. But in the women that were in my study at the director and VP level, I would say most of them adapted their behavior because they felt it was necessary in order to be perceived as a leader by their team and by their bosses. And there are other women that choose not to do that, and that's fine. You know, you have to do what's most appropriate and comfortable for you. Yes?
So building on that, 'cause, I wanted to go back to that example of in a meeting and how genders may present differently and whatnot. What is that practical advice if the generalities are true? Or as a woman who I might want to present more, have more of a story or verbal discussion versus getting right to the point, again, generalities. What is your recommendation on how to in essence, adapt to your audience's environment while still remaining true to yourself? And more so, how do you also use maybe those generalities to your advantage?
Well, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
So that's the point of sharing this with you tonight and doing the research, because I wanted to know too, what's behind all this, and why do we have this gap and hasn't changed in decades? It's about adapting, and it's about and it's not about changing who you are at your core. Matter of fact, if you've done any of the personality assessments like Myers-Briggs or social styles or DISC or colors, all of those are based on Carl Jungian personality preferences: extroversion, introversion, thinking, feeling. They all have that in common. And they're all about not changing who you are, not changing your core personality, but adapting to better connect with others. So as a wise woman, a wise corporate woman, yes, you would need to adapt your behavior given your situation and your surroundings. And you should. And the most successful people have self-awareness, which is an emotional intelligence, EQ attribute, self-awareness. If you're self-aware, you should be adapting into different situations to be most successful. Yeah. I'll go here and then over to Jill.
I have a comment to that and then a question. My comment is that I agree with you. I took a kind of an assessment of like conflict resolution training here at Hologic, which was a great training. And they taught us that the most successful people are the ones that actually do adapt to the different personalities. And there's different personalities in how you work. Like there's people that are more collaborative. There's people that they ignore, conflict and such. And they say, I feel like it's more of the approach that we have to focus on, because there's different types of personalities and how you should approach them. But I feel the most important thing is to be concise and clear about what you feel, but bring it up in the best way to approach the certain personality that you're working with. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah. Well,
My question for you is, have you worked with any individual, a male individual, that studies the same emotional concepts that you do, that studied the same topic about women in the workforce? And do they share the same perception as you do, as what you presented today, about how women are seen in the workforce and how they should approach the situation? There
are a lot of men who've done women in leadership, like dissertations and research, and I've seen some of those. I have not seen any males who's brought in the EQ piece or the gender differences piece, or females for that matter. So But I know a lot of men who, have, because, men are vested, men have wives and daughters, and so they're vested as well. But so I have, seen research on female leaders by men, but even Sheryl Sandberg, she doesn't talk about the EQ piece or the gender differences piece. She talks about the leadership gap and some of the barriers, that we experience. But the EQ piece is so important because, again, it's the key differentiator of success in life and leadership effectiveness. So if you have high EQ, and here's another great news about this, you can't really impact your IQ. You can improve your EQ though. So I would recommend to you to get an assessment, first of all, to get a baseline of where you're at. And then in all of these reports, there's strategies and recommendations. So if you're low in certain areas, you could beef up. There's things you can do, like I shared, to improve in those areas. So, I think it's highly important. And someone said this to me earlier at the networking is, my company doesn't do this. It's been around for 30 years. Most companies, emotional intelligence is not embedded in the culture. That just shocks me. So there's so much data behind to show that it's a key success driver, but yet our companies don't train on it consistently. It's not in the culture consistently. So that's another piece that we need to help develop.
And then to go with that, have you interviewed any of the top women leaders from these Fortune 500 companies and asked what made them successful and what made them get the leadership roles that they are in now?
At the 23 I've shared,
yes.
No, I haven't had the chance to interview. I would love to interview them. That's a great idea, actually. If anyone happens to have the emails or phone numbers of these women, I'd be happy to call them up. But yeah, that would be fascinating to find out.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. Jill, yes.
Sean, you and I share the same passion for emotional intelligence, but one thing to kind of answer your question, and this is just one person's opinion, but I think we all have to be committed to getting better developing throughout our entire career. And I think we have to keep in mind as emotional intelligence, it doesn't mean that women have emotional intelligence and male don't. There's female attributes and male attributes, and we have to continually think about where we are and where we want to go and how we can grow. So to answer that is, if we just say that I am the way I am, I'm never going to change, then you're probably not going to keep moving up. And what's really surprising, especially if you do these great assessments that include the 360, because for me, it was kind of mind-blowing. I thought I was a certain way, but when I saw how everyone else perceived me, I was like, ooh, there is definitely a disconnect between the way I want to be perceived and the way that I am actually perceived. So with that, there's certain leadership qualities or certain leadership traits that are considered male, but they work. And there's a great example. I'll just share the story. I just read this article. There's a woman who went into a senior leader position at a company, and the first thing she did is she admitted that I don't really know your business. I need to learn from you. I'm going to listen to you. So she was being very open. And what happened is she, 3 months later, was let go, and she was no longer in that position. And it's because even though she was being open, no one had the confidence now that she could move forward and lead them through that. So leadership is about getting people to want to do what you need them to do and to follow you. And so sometimes as women, it gets so easy to say, I'm going to be the girly me, and every man has to recognize it and put me at the top. And we're never going to get ahead that way. We just have to realize that there are certain things that I might need to get stronger in as a woman, and maybe it's confidence, maybe it's being assertive. And if I want to become a better leader and move up, those are the emotional intelligence competencies I need to get stronger on. So I think there's obviously opportunities for people at the top to recognize and mentor stuff, but we've got to take ownership. If we want those jobs, we want to move up, it's up to us, and we can develop those skills.
Yep.
We can take control.
You can develop those skills, absolutely.
So kind of related follow-on, I'm curious if the successful men have developed the female dominant attributes.
I don't know about that, but one thing I can share is that I asked the women about the adapting part and about the female attributes, and what they told me is that once they reached the level that their goal, let's say they made it to the VP level, finally, after 20 years, they felt they were at a point where they could leverage and bring up more of those female attributes. They suppressed, like empathy is a great one. So the women I talked to actually downplayed the empathy because they were perceived to be a leader. And again, agenic leader qualities, is those are male traits for the most part. But, and I heard this more than once, is that once they got to that position, they to be a better leader, they leveraged those female attributes, those interpersonal relationships and that empathy and their listening skills, and that made them even better. So the bottom line is we need balanced leadership. We need both male and female specific EQ attributes in our leaders. We don't need all male and we don't need all female. We need both. We need a balanced leadership. That's ideal. That's what we have. And right now, our scales are not balanced. So, and we all know that. But, yeah. So I thought that was fascinating because more than one woman, director or VP, shared that with me, that they were leveraging more of the female once they finally, made it, quote unquote. Yeah, I think, was there a question over here? Did we get that? Okay, in the back, and then I'll come to you. Yes?
I'll first ask my question, then I'll qualify. In your research, have you heard anything about sense of humor? And the reason I'm asking is I've noticed working with executives, they say the most outrageous things, but then they end the meeting with a conversation with a joke, and they're loved again. And that is I find it a great strategy that I can observe in use.
What was the first part? Have I heard of what?
Sense of humor.
Oh, sense of humor. Oh. Well, I think that's beneficial in all of our leaders, actually. I'm not sure if what's the specific question? I think I may.
During your research.
Oh, sense of humor, did it come up during the, no, yeah. Yeah. That is actually a personality trait. It's not so much an emotional intelligence competency. So you have your IQ, you have your EQ, and you have your personality, your core trait. So those three come together. So the sense of humor falls more into the personality trait. But it's something you can develop, absolutely, if you wanted to. You can improve. Yes?
I just wanted to make a comment. Actually, what is fascinating is your thing about self-respect and its relationship to confidence. And when we looked at our mentoring program, the one thing that came out on top of that, people got out of our mentoring program or the HBA mentoring program, was confidence. And I think that us as women, what we have to do and remember every day is to support one another. Because when we support one another, we build on another's confidence. And when you raise one person, you raise us all. And that's really, what an organisation like the HBA is about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what we have to remember every day.
Yeah. Well, the HBA is fantastic because it helps support the barriers, all the barriers I talked about, and serve as a buffer as well, I think. So, networking, building the relationships, helping us get a different perspective, all helps with those barriers, and absolutely can help build confidence. Yeah. Was there, yes?
So on the EQ assessment, is that something you can do individually, or do you have to do it corporately? Because how does the 360 work if you're doing it individually?
Well, the 360, you would send that out to 4 or 5 people that you work closest to, and then they answer the questions about you, and then you get a comprehensive report that talks about how they perceive you and recommendations. The individual, though, any of those companies I share, Multi-Health System's the one that I find to be the most robust. Sorry if there's anyone from Talent Smart here, but it's the most. It's been the most used in academia, and it's the most validated worldwide. So, and there's 133 questions, but it only takes about 20 minutes to do. So I would recommend if you want a comprehensive EQ assessment, it's $55. You could do it individually. You just go onto their website and do it. The Talent Smart one is a quick, less expensive, just a quick shot, and it also has strategies and recommendations as well. But the report's a little more, a little simpler than the Multi-Health System one. Yes, excellent questions. I think we've covered the whole gamut here. Anything else burning on your minds? No? Well, I thank you very much for your time again. Thank you.
Delivered again, didn't we? Thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much. I have a beautiful bottle of wine for you.
You do?
Yes.
Excellent.
It's called Empower. It's from Lynn. It is. It really is. And it's from Lynn Nye. And we thank you for empowering us. Thank you very
Thank
much. One thing I did learn from this was that, based on what Lynn said earlier, the HBA group is the type of group where you could talk to each other and share these stories, share these issues, share these, the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will, and then start to get answers. Because as you can see here with this group, they're all sizes, all levels, all ages. Some of us have been there, done that. Some of us are still going to be there and do that. And my only, I think, regret is that as a woman, I did not take advantage of mentors and coaches and talking to the one next door like men do. I mean, when I mentor the women that I mentor, the people who are in my team, I say to them, you have to be half woman and half man in order to make it, which means, you have to have a little EQ of both, right? And to move on. And to some women, that's no, I'm not going to do that for whatever reason. But I think what you get here, and especially through the mentor program, but just coming to these events, just getting to know people that you can call up as a resource and talk to, this is the perfect place to do it. Of all the women's groups or groups in San Diego or in Orange County or LA that you could join and hope to get something from, this is the one I joined, right? This is the one I put my money down on, because this is what I get, even at my age, from it. Somebody told me once when I was just growing up in business, you can never learn less, and that's true. So anyway, again, thank you. I don't need to go on anymore, but that is the pitch for the HBA, and please, please, please do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming down.
Thanks.
All
I appreciate it.
We are, no, I have one more thing to say. Lucille Shaw, and you don't leave Lucille out, because she is our volunteer engagement program lead. Thank you. And we listen to everything she says.
Thank you all, and that was a very good presentation and a good segue to what I'm about to say. First of all,